Started, let me welcome you to the webinar and also wish happy birthday to the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium. We are just now entering our third year of operation. We participated last week in the annual ASHE conference. This year it was in Pittsburgh. We were part of both a panel and a half-day workshop on sustainability competencies. With this webinar today, we launch our fall webinar series. In the coming days, we will post the rest of our schedule for the fall semester. We're still trying to nail down dates with some interesting presenters. For those of you who are familiar with Sustainability Curriculum Consortium, you know that the mission is to support teaching faculty in sustainability in higher education. From the outset, we asked two very basic questions of educators. What are your biggest challenges and what are your greatest needs? We've set our programming to be responsive to your answers to those basic questions. Our scope is limited to curriculum and faculty development. We array that across three categories or themes: pedagogy, content, and leadership. So far, we've done over 40 webinars. The recordings are all posted on the SCC website. Those webinars have included ad hoc topics as well as a series of webinars, including an International Perspectives series hosted by Kim Smith of Portland Community College. And we've also been doing a collaborative webinar series with ASHE to showcase the work of their regional curriculum centers, and we will be continuing that this year. We're also pioneering online cohorts, which are multi-week deeper dives into topics like teaching sustainable business and messaging and communication for sustainability. This year we'll also be hosting pay-per-view masterclasses with some of the leaders in our field. Of course, we also followed through on one of our initial promises to create a dedicated event, an annual event for teaching faculty. We've now done 2 SCC faculty conferences in 2017 in Philadelphia and earlier this year in Pittsburgh in collaboration with the Penn State Sustainability Institute, and we could not have done that without the collaboration of my co-host Peter Buckland of Penn State. Kudos to Peter for helping to facilitate that. For today's webinar, we're going to summarize the results and implications of a pre-survey that we fielded earlier this year in the run-up to our faculty conference. We had launched an online curriculum dialogue, and we began the process with the survey instrument developed by Peter Soyka of Soyka Company. We didn't intend this pre-survey to be comprehensive, but we did think it would help us perform some important foundational work by documenting pre-existing views in the community of practice regarding the purpose and content of sustainability curricula delivered at the university level. Our goal was to understand the range of views held and identify any areas of concurrence, as well as highlight issues for further exploration as we continued our online curriculum dialogue. immediately after our faculty conference in Pittsburgh in June, the results of the pre-survey was also shared at a meeting of the Council of Environmental Deans and Directors, which was held at Chatham University in Pittsburgh immediately after our event. That was by design. It was part of our integration and alignment with the relevant activities on sustainability in higher education with different programs of the National Council for Science and the Environment, NCSE. Earlier this year, separately, NCSE had launched a process through SED, the Council of Deans and Directors, focusing on key competencies in sustainability degree programs. It was obvious that there was a need to collaborate with that effort, and SCC committed to the integration and alignment of our somewhat broader curriculum dialogue with the NCSE process on sustainability competencies. That collaboration has already resulted in last week's joint panel and a half-day workshop at the ASHE conference. To take a look forward, the joint effort will take the form of a dual-track approach. One track will consist of a Delphi panel to be led by Katja Brunders of Arizona State University. The complementary track in this dual-track approach, which will be led by SCC, will proceed with workshops, online dialogue, surveys, and other activities. Katja Rod Parnell of Northern Arizona University, who is now on sabbatical and wearing an NCSE senior fellow hat, and I will be ensuring the coordination of this dual track approach. The proposed goal from the NCSE perspective is to create a consensus statement on sustainability competencies. The SCC contribution to that process thus far is the results of the pre-survey developed by Peter Soyka. And today we will be limiting our discussion to a summary and an analysis of the SCC pre-survey. Let me proceed now to briefly introduce Peter. Peter is a member of the SCC Advisory Council. We're pleased that someone with his years of experience in strategic planning, operations management, sustainability management, auditing, analysis, and improvement has taken an interest in the SCC mission to develop a coherent, comprehensive approach to delivering sustainability education at the college and graduate level. Peter is a recognized environmental management and sustainability expert. He's authored numerous guidance manuals, handbooks, journal articles, project reports, some of which I myself was pleased to participate in with Peter. Prior to founding Soyka Company, Peter served in executive positions in 2 national publicly traded consulting engineering firms. He's a certified project management professional, holds degrees from Duke, and I can go on and express continuing appreciation for Peter and his support of SCC. But what I will do now is simply change the presenter role over to Peter, and he will accept the presenter role, and hopefully what we will soon see on the screen will be Peter's presentation slides in full format, and I'm seeing them now. I hope everyone else is. Again, I'm passing the baton over to Peter. Please do, as we proceed, put your questions and comments in the chat box, and I'll be watching that closely. Thank you. Peter, all yours.
Thank you, Ira, for that kind introduction and description of this effort and the context in which it falls. And good afternoon or morning to all, wherever you may be. It's my pleasure to be with you today to talk about this work we did a bit earlier in the year. What I'd like to do is, I don't think I'm going to talk very much about purpose and context. Ira has given us a very thorough grounding in what this small effort was about and how it fits into the larger context. I will instead spend most of my time describing the survey and its results, which have to do with how curriculum for sustainability can be designed and delivered in a college and university setting. And to get at that, we developed a simple but fairly thought-provoking, I think, survey instrument, administered that to a number of people who had self-selected by indicating that they were interested in participating in a dialogue on sustainability competencies. And my task was to design the instrument and then collect up and make sense of the results that we received back. And that's what I'm going to talk with you about today. To in a sense, wrestle this complex topic to the ground, we developed, if you will, 4 different lenses or
Yes, I'm seeing that Peter is muted. Apparently, Peter, if you can hear us, please check your audio connection.
My apologies, Ira. I don't know why that happened. I did not mute myself. I don't know where the trail went cold, but let me sort of briefly summarize what I just said a moment ago, and that is that we tried to look at several different angles on sustainability curriculum, starting with emphasis, the degree to which certain aspects should be receive more prominence or less, depending on the sophistication of the students being taught. Competencies, really getting into that in some specificity. I'll have some results to share with you on that. In a related vein, given that there is very widespread agreement that sustainability is fundamentally multi or ideally interdisciplinary, what sorts of academic training are relevant or most relevant or even essential to the proper design and delivery of sustainability curricula in college and university settings? And then finally, looking at individual concepts. This is a field in which there are lots of different terms and concepts in play. I had some curiosity about which would be most widely embraced or thought to be most important within the academic community, viewed from my perch as a practitioner. So that's really what we tried to get at, and I have some results on that to share with you today. I expect that we will have some time at the end of this conversation for questions, comments, and discussion, but as Ira said earlier, we encourage all of you, if you have questions along the way, please enter them in the chat box, and I'll take breaks periodically as I go through the material to respond to any questions that you might have. So let's talk about emphasis first. You can see at the top there we did get 34 responses from those interested. And this table kind of racks up the results. We, again, define, if you will, 4 basic baskets: terminology, basic concepts, competencies, and practical skills development. I didn't go to a great deal of trouble to define each of them. Hopefully they're reasonably self-explanatory. We asked the respondents to tell us within each academic level, starting with the 100 level intro classes, moving up to the more advanced undergrad 300 level classes, and finally the 500 level graduate course classes. You know, what level of emphasis do you think is appropriate to place on things like terminology, basic concepts on the one hand, and more, if you will, sophisticated and extensive application moving to the right? What you'll see here, I think, is several things. The first is that they all seem to be important across all academic levels, with very few exceptions. Nobody really advocates 1 or 2 or 3 of them at to the exclusion of the others. What you do see, though, however, is a pronounced shift from in the more introductory courses, more emphasis on terminology, basic concepts, helping students really understand some of the underlying theory and important phenomena and terms. As they get more advanced, more sophisticated, have a better, more extensive grounding, moving into more discussion of competencies, less discussion of basics, and at the highest levels, really beginning to develop some of those practical skills that are needed to be effective out there in the world, helping to make it more sustainable. Question on the numbers. Again, 100 level classes are viewed as introductory undergraduate level classes. 300 level is a class that you would encounter after already taking several introductory classes and developing some mastery of a particular subject. And 500 level classes are graduate level, masters in doctoral studies. So let's move on. Key competencies, kind of at the heart of it. What you're seeing here is a chart showing the number of respondents out of 34 that thought a particular competency is important, should be developed in students pursuing sustainability in higher education. Probably to no one's great surprise, you see systems thinking leading the pack with 32 affirmative responses, followed closely by several others: communication skills, strategic thinking, and interestingly, creativity and innovation. Then there are a bunch more: interpersonal skills, cultural and ethical literacy, temporal thinking and future focus, quantitative and analytical skills, leadership, and so on. What strikes me is that some of the other more, if you will, business-oriented skills, operations, management skills, negotiation, and so on, were not viewed as very important by most of the respondents here. I would point out that there were several others offered up by respondents. From here you can see the third bar from the right is other. That only attracted 7 or 8. It seems like we covered the waterfront reasonably well, but some of the other competencies offered up range from things like hope and empathy to more specific fields like health literacy, complexity science, and policy analysis, as well as higher order thinking and critical thinking. So cuts a pretty wide swath. Core subject matter domains, and I want to be clear about what this means. The question that was posed to respondents was, what do you believe are the core subject matter domains in which students pursuing sustainability in higher education should develop a basic understanding by the completion of their curriculum? So these are academic domains in which it would be important for the student to have at least some level of understanding beyond just superficial or introductory level. Here's what we got. Leading the pack here are ecology and economics, the two disciplines with the same Latin root, followed by another set which includes government and civics, statistics and data analysis, law and policy, behavior of organizations, and sociology. And then there are a few more earth sciences, the other category, and then moving into some of the social sciences and humanities. What's interesting to me here is that some of the domains that seem to be very prominent in the media and arguably in the business world and in the way that people very often talk about sustainability, such as architecture and management, engineering, and the like, were not viewed as core subject matter domains by very many of our respondents, which I find pretty interesting. I do want to point out some of the other ones that were suggested. These include health, ecological economics, geography, humanities and language generally, and then concepts like indigenous knowledge, design, integrated programs, and even international relations. So a pretty wide span. Let me pause there for a moment and see if there are any questions.
Yes, Peter. Going back to the last slide, Max is asking, were those competencies given to the survey respondents, were they listed, or did you categorize them into the 14 that we see here on the slide?
Yeah, we did, it's a good question. We did pre-populate the survey with the terms that you see listed there. And we did leave plenty of space for each respondent to suggest others. And that's where the other category, again, the third bar from the right, we only received 7 or 8. And most folks were happy to, or at least satisfied with just, if you will, checking the box. And as you can see, most people checked more than a few.
Let me ask another question that will inevitably come up here related to the competencies piece. Where did we, as the survey developers, come up with the competencies that were listed? What did we look at to inform this?
Sure. There is, as you might expect, didn't just sit in my office and invent these. The ones that you see listed there were developed by me with some input from Ira, basically reflecting an amalgam of a limited review of the literature. I think probably everybody's familiar with the Week et al. Article, which addressed core competencies. My own observations from last year's SCC conference, which I attended, and some of the results developed from our previous survey effort, which was more wide-ranging and had many more respondents. So it's kind of a combination of different things, tried to cover the waterfront reasonably well, understanding that it would be very unlikely that the survey would reflect all of the competencies that people think might be important. But again, if there are others important competencies that were missing, nobody chose to offer them up.
So, as Peter indicated, clearly we were aware of and were informed by the influential Week article. We were familiar with the Australian work that has informed competencies efforts. And I would also add to the mix of things that we looked at the ISSP, the Sustainability Professionals Competency Survey from 2010. Peter, maybe you can, well, first I'll just say thank you for noting, Peter, that this is not the first survey that you fielded for SCC. Maybe we can come back to the to that in a little while. I'm looking at the incoming posts here. One question is, what were the titles of the folks who responded? And again, if you can remind all how they self-selected.
I don't honestly know what all the titles of the respondents were. I took them as a group of people who had, as I understand it, expressed interest in participating in an online dialogue concerned with sustainability competencies. My understanding is that most of these folks are in the academic community. They are actively teaching sustainability at the college or university level.
Yeah, again, it was a reflection of the SCC community of practice, which is largely, but not entirely, teaching faculty. We did have a few sustainability directors in there, but again, these were people who were invited to participate in an ongoing online dialogue about sustainability curriculum, and so that's how they were self-selected. I'll point out that as we're chatting in the chat box, Peter Buckland has been posting a number of different items that would be useful for those interested to take a further look at. Harold Glasser's work, I would point out that Harold did an SCC webinar on his work a few months ago, and the recording is posted on our website. Another comment is I wonder how these results would compare to a similar survey of market actors, folks that would be hiring these students. And maybe you want to hold that until you work through the rest of your slides, Peter.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Why don't we continue? I'm going to go back to where we were here. Again, the core subject matter domains that were offered up by respondents. As you can see, there's pretty widespread support for quite a variety of different academic subject matter domains, ranging from sciences to economics, law and policy, quantitative methods and statistics, and so on. I think I did cover some of the other ones that had been suggested. Not being quite satisfied with that, I then tallied up how many academic disciplines were suggested by the individual respondents. And you can see here rank order results. One person seemed to think that it's basically all good and all essential. So 17 different disciplines, a couple of others with more than 10. You can see here that although those are on the kind of the edges of the distribution, there are quite a number of respondents that would advocate that people pursuing sustainability at the college or university have at least some reasonably good grounding in, 6 to 8 different academic disciplines. That would make for, I think, a pretty well-rounded, well-educated person. I would leave it to those of you in the academic community to think through how exactly you get that done in the context of a 4-year undergraduate degree or a 2 to 3 year master's degree. So that's maybe a topic for others to consider. Next, kind of getting, if you will, a little bit more personal or individualized, we asked which of the following concepts should be included at sustainability curriculum delivered at your specific institution, whatever that might be. So there's quite a laundry list, which again was developed from my own knowledge of the field, the sorts of terms and concepts I see being discussed and acted upon out there in both the policy arena and in the business community, and in no particular order listed them, and people could kind of say yes, no, maybe, or don't know as to whether I think this ought to be included in sustainability studies, again, at the different levels of mastery within academic curricula, 100 level, 300 level, 500 level. And so I tallied up all these results and then sorted them. And so you can see concepts like sustainability, CSR, sustainable development are kind of led the pack with the most positive responses, followed by environmental and social justice, globalization. Interestingly, the sustainable development goals, despite their relatively recent vintage, are viewed as pretty central, pretty important for students to know about. We then have used phrases like the triple bottom line. We have some building related concepts like energy efficiency and green building. Ecosystem services is viewed as important. And then we start getting into recycling, materials management, product life cycles, and concepts of that type. I also looked at the other end of the distribution, which you can see here. And so this is sort of the bottom, those concepts that people are least excited about or think are least important to be delivered to students. And you see here a lot of the more business and economics related concepts are shown here. Particularly low support for introductory classes and even sort of throughout the undergraduate curriculum, more support for these as you get into graduate level study. There were a number of other concepts that we included, things like vision, mission, and values, regulation, circular economy, natural capitalism, public disclosure and transparency, biomimicry, codes of conduct and voluntary standards, market failures, regenerative capitalism, and several others. We did get some suggestions for concepts that should be included. These included things like collaboration, planning, stakeholder engagement, some of the more science-based concepts like natural selection, geochemical cycles, again, indigenous knowledge, and social and environmental determinants of health, things of that sort. So a pretty wide range. So that sort of does it for me in terms of presenting the numbers. Out of my review of these results, came up with some questions that I think might be worthy of some further attention or discussion. possibly starting here, but could take place in any number of different forums. One that I think Ira touched on earlier, which is the knowledge, skills, and competencies that are valued by employers. It's one thing to believe that a proper sustainability education should develop certain competencies, but it sure would be nice if there was some alignment between those and the capabilities that those out in the marketplace, whether it's public or private sector, value in their new hires. There's been some suggestions, both in response to this survey and in other work, that sustainability knowledge perhaps should be a core requirement for all college graduates. That's a suggestion that I can't really speak to or take on, but found it interesting that may be something that some of you may want to explore further. One of the things that we ran across in the initial survey and does sort of come to bear here as well is whether there are incentives or adequate incentives for interdisciplinary teaching and co-teaching. These were among the absence of these sorts of incentives were among the barriers that have been identified in at least my involvement with this particular domain, and I think could certainly receive some focused attention. Related to that, perhaps gaining more understanding and support from administrators and campus staff, raising awareness that this type of material and sustainability education writ large really are important to all of us and should be actively supported. And then finally, and referring back to SCC, one of SCC's kind of core activities are really helping to bring clarity to effective pedagogical methods. So these are all things that may be worthy of some further thought and discussion among you all and in your various professional activities. That is what I have for you today. I know that there have been a number of other questions that have come in, so why don't we turn to that?
Thank you, Peter. Let me start by once again putting this presentation into a little bit of context. The idea of doing an online curriculum dialogue by SCC emerged from the 2017 SCC Faculty Conference, and in particular a session that was titled Sorting Sorting Concepts and Content Across the 100, 300, and 500 level. I underscore that this particular survey was called a pre-survey, suggesting perhaps that there will be at a later date a follow-on survey or several more focused surveys. So these slides today should not be viewed as conclusions or recommendations. This was a beginning of a longer effort and was intended to inform a starting point, a baseline, if you will, as we moved on to more specific activities. So again, to clarify that, I just wanted to be sure that we're not misrepresenting anything that's been laid out here. There are individuals on the line who have a wealth of experience on sustainability competencies and other sustainability curriculum topics, and so I'd like to move to some of the comments and questions that have been posed. So Jan posted, if natural resources were a domain, would it have attracted many votes? Would it be useful to do another survey in which economic sectors would be in the domains? So I throw that out to you as a first one for comment, Peter. And I'll give you the other one that came in earlier. How do you differentiate between ethical and normative competencies?
Well, I'll take the second one first. I'm not sure that I do. In posing it that way, and this kind of speaks to methodology. As I said, the competencies that were defined in the survey instrument represent my attempt to synthesize a pretty wide range of ideas that had been expressed in various ways by people in the field. And to me, and maybe this reflects the limits of my own knowledge, those competencies or those concepts seemed similar enough to combine in that way, just in the interests of limiting the number of possible responses and trying to synthesize a large amount of material into something that was manageable. So I did not intend to draw any distinction, nor did I intend to cloud any meaningful distinction. And but if folks thought that was important, it might be worthwhile at some point to try to break them out.
Okay, just to respond to some other comments that have been posted, some people are already looking at the SCC website to look for these slides. As I posted earlier in the chat box, the slides will be posted on the SCC website, and the recording link will be posted on the SCC website. They will be both on the homepage and under archived webinars. So also, I want to thank Peter Buckland for continuing to populate the chat box with useful references. The same to Michelle Merrill for posting a link to her work. I see that Sue Barsom is on, and she asks, do you mean sustainability knowledge, skills, and competencies valued by employers, or just the general ones? That was Sue's comment.
Well, I was referring to it, as it says right there on the slide, employers. I sort of live in the private sector world, and graduates, certainly when I was a graduate, I was looking for a job when I finished my studies, and my sense is that today's graduates are looking at it in the same way. Certainly the results from our initial survey suggested that that was the case, and that there have been some concerns on the part of enrolled in sustainability courses and curricula that perhaps a little more coherence, perhaps a little bit more emphasis on practical skills development would be helpful to them in securing employment following their studies.
Another question was, is there any consideration or curriculum offering about conflict resolution for the pros and cons of the various SDGs?
I don't feel equipped to respond to that question.
Well, and I would quickly jump in and say that is one potential further area of investigation that we as SCC can pursue. Again, if I can try to guide any further comments and questions in the chat box, this is intended to give you an idea of where we're starting from. We want you, as all key members of this community of practice, to have a role in defining where we go next. As I explained earlier, the SCC scope is more broadly sustainability curriculum. The NCSE effort that we're feeding into will focus principally on competencies. We can explore other areas in our online dialogue, in future webinars, in the session that we plan to offer at the NCSE conference in January, and again at next year's SCC faculty conference. So we're looking to you on the line here to not necessarily right now, but certainly you can contact me directly with thoughts about how we could take the next steps in the online curriculum dialogue. I will also say that the Delphi panel that I mentioned at the beginning, that will be led by Katja Brunders, the details of that are still being worked out. I can say that I expect that many people in the SCC community of practice will be approached for their thoughts about participation in the Delphi panel as well. So if you have further inquiries about that, you can contact me and or Katja Brunders. I'm happy to forward all inquiries over to her, and she and I and Rod Parnell will be reviewing the input from last week's ASHE panel, ASHE workshop, and today's webinar to think about next steps. So with that, I will say thank you to Peter for teeing all this up for our further consideration, and I look forward to hearing from all of you and getting you engaged in the next steps in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ira. And thank you all for listening.